So let's go back to the beginning. Where did your love of science fiction and folklore come from?
Much like most fantasy writers, I imagine, from fairy tales and the kids' stories that my parents read to me. And I had the tape recorder, you know, the kind of old-fashioned, like I had a bag, like literally a big bag full of tapes with Russian fairy tales and, you know, Brothers Grimm fairy tales, stuff like that. And I would listen to it every night. And then from then on, because I've always read very widely, I just read anything that appealed, and I really loved Marion Zimmer Bradley when I was about, I don't know, I must have been about 10 when I discovered Marion Zimmer Bradley, and it was this big revelation that you can have this like retelling of the Arthurian legends and from a woman's perspective, and it was just really and from then on I got really interested in fantasy novels specifically. Sci-fi less so. I never really got into it, so I've sort of missed out, you know, when like you should get into sci-fi quite early and then you have all that background. For me, reading sci-fi, it's kind of hard to judge because I don't really have the reference points.
Yeah.
But fantasy has been something I've been very much interested in since an early age. Reading comic books, reading. So yeah.
I always have reading gaps as well, whether it's science fiction or fantasy, and I come back to them years later. Like I'm only just reading Octavia Butler now because I just missed out on it for whatever reason. So, you know, I'm catching up on things as well. And science fiction. I didn't read like Asimov until I was in my 20s, or, you know, all this sort of stuff. There's too much now, you know, and you can't keep up. It's
hard to keep up with the things that you absolutely have to read.
Yes.
That are coming out now, because there's just, I mean, I say it in a few interviews, but I really believe it, that we live in a golden age of fantasy, and just the quality of stuff coming out every single month. Every single month you have like 10, 20 books that are a must read, and nobody's reading capabilities, nobody's time allows for that kind of reading volume.
Nope.
But I mean, mine used to, but adult life interfered with my reading ambitions. So it's just it's very hard to catch up, much less to sort of delve into the kind of classics if you haven't sort of read them already.
Yeah. My to read pile's behind me. I've got stuff to catch up on. That's just the ones that I must read them. Anyway, so who do you think some of your early influences were then on when you then started writing yourself? Who do you think played a role in influencing your work?
Quite a few. So there were some comic book influences actually from the Wendy and Richard Peeney's ElfQuest comic books, which have been sort of coming out since the 70s. And the newer series, not so much, but the early ones were huge influence when I was about 7 years old. It was so ahead of its time in terms of concepts of sort of othering and kind of inclusivity and being just sort of very unshrinking view of like sexuality, and it was really, really beautiful. And there were elves like you haven't seen, like at that point you hadn't seen them before, so they weren't like Tolkien-esque. They were quite sort of, you know, forest dwelling or desert dwelling, you know, hunters and fighters, and the kind of brutal struggle against the sort of Ver Earth's indigenous population of kind of humans so when I was a little girl, this was really influential on me in a way that I thought where you can represent societies that are so that are familiar, but are so different from ours, that are more open, that are more unjudging, you know, just where the rules are about safety but not propriety. And I found that very appealing. So that was sort of like the comic book influences. Of course, like I read Neil Gaiman, books of magic and Sandman, and then his novels, and Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett is just...
He's so clever. He's such a clever man.
He was just marvelous. Like when I was a very when I was a very young girl, I kind of hoped that maybe one day I'll be able to meet him. Unfortunately, that didn't sort of happen with me. But it's he is a real inspiration in terms of just how he could portray serious subjects in a way that, with humor, but with humor that also served a very serious function of making the subject matter accessible in a way that wouldn't be if he just discussed those subjects in a very serious way. So I think that is so when that actually set like a benchmark for me in terms of when I read sometimes newer fiction and I see something that feels too didactic, and that really irritates me, because I feel like this is really you're putting a barrier. You're putting a barrier because instead of showing something, instead of showing a different way of being, or you are trying to tell the reader how they should feel, and that will only sort of have the opposite effect of the intended one if you kind of try to give your opinions on how you should, like, oh, you should treat people in this way, or this is how you should this is how you should speak to people, this is how you should, you have a gay character, you have to have a monologue about how it's okay to be gay in society. It's like, no, can you just show it?
Yeah.
Can you just show it in a way that doesn't feel like you're trying to make people, and I think that is so effective when you show without over explaining and without being too kind of on the nose with things. And I thought Terry Pratchett was so wonderful in that respect, that he didn't over explain. He just said things with humor in a straightforward way, and humor has a way of exposing some of the kind of ridiculous misconceptions we might have.
Got a visitor.
Hello, Delphi. I was ignoring her because she was sort of pawing me, and I was ignoring her a little bit.
One of mine's around somewhere. Yeah, Terry Pratchett was... Most people just think he was very, very funny, but he was an exceptionally clever man. He was so clever the way that he could do something. I mean, there are some modern books that, like you, I've read and I've thrown them across the room because they've been so preachy that I've just got, I said, you're not even trying, you're just trying to tell me how I should feel and how I should treat people.
It's just exactly, and it's such a missed opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you can have a book that touches on some really sensitive subjects, and you feel like you could have handled it with with kind of kid gloves, and you could have sort of been a bit more gentle, and that would have been so much more effective. So I think that really set a benchmark for me in terms of what I expect when you're tackling certain sort of societal and like sort of more serious issues.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned before, Marion Zimmer Bradley was a huge influence on me. It's a kind of, I'm sorry, I'm gonna
move the cat.
Because she is sort of moving the computer at this point. It's okay when she's just here wanting to be petted, but not when she's I sort of almost hesitate to mention her because of everything, all the horrific allegations that came out about her after her death, and so I don't want to glorify her, but her writing was really influential on me. So it would be, I would feel amiss if I didn't mention it, because in quite separating her work, from the person.
Yes.
Her work just sort of did things in a way that I hadn't seen before. Most of fantasy at that point had been written by men, white men. And most of it did not actually feature female characters in a way that we see in novels coming out now. And, as a young girl kind of growing up, I really, I was so hyper conscious of that. And I was so, I was reading all those novels, and it irritated me that all the female characters were just, eye candy, basically, for the main protagonist as he went on his epic journey. And to have the Arthurian legends, which of course are rooted in this kind of chivalry culture, the courtly love culture, which puts women on a pedestal, but puts them in a place where they're essentially stripped of their personhood, and they're stripped of their humanity to an extent. They're just a thing to pine for. And you have this novel that sort of turned things on their head and really focused on the journey of the villain, and humanized her and gave her own agency. And I thought that was just so wonderfully done. And this style of turning the old stories on their heads is more, it's sort of been done more recently, the way you have, of course, Madeline Miller's Circe coming out. It's the sort of untold story. I just finished reading Genevieve Gornichek's Witch's Heart, which I thought was quite wonderful. And again, it feels like the missing piece of a story that has been told. And I have read all those Norse myths, first time when I was in high school, and then a few years ago again. But that piece was not there. It was this missing journey that must have been fascinating, when you think about it. And even, but until it's pointed out that this bit is missing, you might not realize just how rich that story could be. And Gornichek did a wonderful job, I thought, in kind of writing something that feels like it really has its place in the epics. It does have that style. But again, it does something new, and it tells stories that haven't been told before, which is wonderful, and also very surprising, isn't it? Kind of. If
you've seen the same story and people keep telling in their own style, but they're telling you the same story 20 times, by the time you get to the 21st, you're like, I'd really like something a little bit different, even if it's set within the same setting, whether it's a new perspective or just a new way of doing it. And if you can show another side that we haven't seen, that you think, all these men go off to war, that what was happening back at home? Who was looking after it? Who was keeping things running? What was going on whilst they were away? They come back and everything's just fine, but what was happening whilst they were there? What was going on? And we never find out. You don't get told. And you're like, okay, so doing something new would be different, interesting and different. So
exactly. Yeah. It's this, I think the thing you touched on is that in, until quite recently, quite a lot of the fantasy genre, especially sort of from the, like, I want to say like 70s, or like 70s, 80s, 90s, like early 90s. Fantasy genre, I felt, I don't want to be unfair, but like it did feel quite stale, with some like rare exceptions, in a way that a lot of it felt like sort of, follow the same structure, sort of hero's journey. And it was the same, it felt like the same story being told over and over again. And I feel what's really changed is that you have all those writers who would not have been allowed into the publishing world, telling new stories in different ways, or even looking at the stories we know already and turning them on their heads and doing something new and unexpected. And even though like at the time I really enjoyed reading all those fantasy novels, there was a feeling that a lot of it was doing the same thing. And now I feel like, every month I read something new and it feels new and it feels fresh, which is wonderful.
Yes, the last probably 10, maybe 10, 15 years, there's been a lot more focus in the publishing of science fiction, fantasy publishing to get more original voices, more diverse voices, new stories, because the farm boy story's been done so many times. Unless you can bring something really new to it, they're probably not going to go for it. Or, the chosen one trope's been done to death. And so like some people saying, don't do tropes. I'm thinking, if you can do something that we've never seen before, by all means, but if it's the same story that we've seen 100 times, you can just pick up one of the other books off the shelf and read it. So why would you want to, read the same thing yet again?
I would find like it's quite, I mean, of course, there is this aspect of, whatever story you might have come up with, like someone out there might have come up with something similar, or there might already be an existing book that covers this. But it will still feel different if you kind of, instead of relying on the sort of hero's journey sort of steps, if you have your own questions you want to ask, and if you have your because in the end, like, I would get bored if I was just writing an adventure for adventure's sake. There's the books I'm writing, I generally start with some big questions that I kind of want to see, like I kind of wonder how people would react to this in this situation, and then I kind of explore it for like different characters, so they will react in different ways, and it's something for me, it's something that keeps me interested. So it's I think I would get bored if I tried to like just write like, okay, well, you have twin brothers and one is the evil one and one's a good one, and they go off on a journey to fight a dragon with a magic sword.
Oh, okay. It's not your thing. It's not your thing. So let's talk a bit
It
about.
used to be when I was reading it, but like when I was a kid. But
yeah, things can get stale if you've read it so many times or you've seen it so many times. You don't want to then write the same thing. I mean, I think when I first started writing, I started by imitating what I knew, and it took a while to find out what I actually wanted to write about. I think I asked a young writer once, what did he want to do with his writing, and it hadn't really occurred to him. He just knew that he had certain stories that he wanted to tell. Whereas in the back of my mind, it's been bubbling for years about what I actually want to do with my writing. But I don't know, maybe it doesn't come to everybody. Maybe it's not a focus for them.
I think it can be. I think it can be like a different, because obviously I just have a few stories that I want to tell, that excite me, I want to tell. That's a very legitimate reason to write.
Yeah.
You don't need to have like necessarily like a big mission statement if you want to entertain people with your stories, right?
Absolutely.
It's more in a way, like if you do it because you enjoy doing it on some level, right? Like if it's painful and if it's then why bother? But sorry, I was struck for a moment there. The imitation thing, like I think all writers have done it. Like everybody I've spoken to, I definitely have done this sort of imitation bit where they would write maybe not even finished novels, but like they would write like a few chapters that felt very much like, I don't know, in my case when I was like 14, I was writing beginnings of novel that were very, very much like the Dragonlance series,
Yeah, I read those growing up,
because I was really into them. So or that felt like, I don't know, something else I just read, or I would try to copy Terry Pratchett style. And it's like, but it's it is such a good tool it is such a good tool to kind of, because of course, you know, you will, in the process of it, you will see what doesn't work, what works, and then in the end, like, you will still write like you.
That's the cat. That was the cat.
Sorry, it's just she wants all the attention to be on her.
So let's talk a bit about your work. So for those who don't know, you and Caroline Hardacre have your own YouTube channel called Bookish Take, and you talk about your experiences as debut authors. So I don't want to duplicate some of that, but you mentioned there, you know, you have big themes about sometimes when you're working on your. Do you plan your books before you start writing them, or do you just go in with a theme and then move forward?
If I try to plan a complete novel before I start, I will divert the plot like half a chapter in. I'm
right.
Like, I mean, outlining is just not something I can do, because I feel like, I mean, everybody works in different ways. It's so funny having these conversations with writers, because everybody is somewhere on the scale from like pantser to outliner. But I tend to just kind of start with this idea or of an atmosphere of a question I want to ask, or something like I have like this really strong relationship in my head, or this really strong drive of the main character. Or in one of the books I wrote, the landscape. I had this idea for a landscape. I was like this craggy cliffs, and I felt like, you know, kind of, what would a bird feel like if it like swooped down? And then of course my mind went to like someone jumping off a cliff, because that's where my mind works, and that's kind of like starting point. But yeah, I take something nice and twist it. Yeah, I sort of write, and about, once I know the characters, once I know what they want, and once I know what problems they face, then about like a third of the way into the novel, the rest of the plot kind of reveals itself to me.
Okay.
Not in great detail, but you sort of suddenly some things click together, and you have this idea for, oh, well, of course, this arc is going to sort of take this shape, and this character is going to do something bad there, and, you know, there's going to be like a massive catastrophe here, or like or some horrifying conflict, or someone's going to die in a terrible way, or, you know, something bad.
Fun
stuff. And then you just write. And of course, I don't know, like I will still, even with a plan where I have kind of like, okay, so in this chapter, something like this is going to happen, and then something like this is going to happen. And then I still come across like things where I suddenly have like, oh, you know, I have a real idea for a really good description, and it's going to tweak it a little bit for what's going to happen. But that's what keeps it exciting for me. I mean, I don't know, what do you do? Because I find sometimes people outline it like they know up to a word what they're going to write. And it's kind of like, it's so boring. It's like, oh, but you've already written it. So what do you have to do?
So I plan mine. So I've tried, over the years, I've experimented. I once had an idea for something, and I made some vague notes, and then I wrote the whole book. I did the whole book, kind of, and I wrote it in a science fiction novel, and it was an absolute mess. It was inconsistent. I looked at it, thought, maybe I can salvage it. I can work. I couldn't. It was horrible. So I learned that's not for me. So I planned my book.
What was it? What was it then? Like,
I
feel like I'm on detail. What
about the book?
Yeah, when something goes catastrophically wrong, I don't want to know.
It didn't work. I mean, I went in with a vague idea of what I was going to do, and I sort of knew where the end was. So I was working towards something, but like there was no payoffs. The characters didn't develop properly. The structure was really bad. It was slow at the beginning, and then it sped up, and it went slow, and it just rushed the end suddenly. And the whole pace was bad. And I was like, I don't care about any of these characters because you haven't thought it through.
Did you see it at the time when you were writing it?
No, I thought it was brilliant. At the time, I thought it's all working. Oh yes, this is great. And I got to the end and just looked back and thought, whoa, no, never again, never again. So I plan mine, and it's worked so far. So I do beginning, middle, and end, and I plan milestones along the way. Not every chapter, unless I really have to. But even then, it's really vague what the chapter's about. It might be in a couple of lines. And the joy for me, the creative part for me, comes in how I get from A to B. I don't know. But when I sit down, it's percolated in the back of my brain whilst I've been sleeping. So I sit down and I start writing, and it just comes out. I didn't know it was going to come out or what was going to happen. Somewhere in my head, I knew somewhere, but unconsciously. So I find the joy in that. And sometimes when I hand the book in, my editor will go, "This is interesting, but this bit just veers off and goes here. And I've no idea where you've done that." And I go, "Yeah, I don't know why." And that has to get trimmed out for clarity.
That gets really exciting though, because it's, I mean, once I have an outline, that is my outline, where it's like I have A and B and C, but I don't know what happens in between them.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting. But so I call it an outline, but a proper planning writer might sort of scoff at that. But it's really exciting, right? If your character has nothing but like a knitting needle and a sheep, and they're standing on the edge of a volcano with an army behind them, you know, charging, like, and you're like, okay, well, this is the A, and the B is going to be that they have somehow reached the forest, riding a chicken. I don't know. And you need to kind of get it through.
A really big chicken or just several chickens?
I don't know. You know, that's kind of
that's
detail,
the fun part.
but that's a detail that I leave for future, Gabriela. So
okay. So you write yourself into a corner and then have fun working out how you get out the corner.
Yes. And it's like sometimes I have like, but you know, obviously future Gabriela, it's like really hates the past Gabriela sometimes, you know. I kind of go through it and I'm like, recently I was going back to the old my like older manuscript, and I was just like, what was I thinking? Like there's like a comment, it's like, I can't be arsed to finish this chapter. And I'm like, thanks.
Wow.
I forgot I did that.
I've seen other people write things and they sort of say, and their plan, they'll put, and something cool happens here. And then they come back to it like, yeah, thanks, past me. Now I've got to think up something really cool. Yeah, great.
Like, insert a conspiracy.
Yeah, so, oh, great. That's going to take me months to develop now. Thanks. That just
months for a walk. It's never, you know, you can never sort of predict how long.
Oh, see, that would put me back months if I didn't think part of it through. I'd lose time, and I just feel like I was wasting time if I was just walking around the garden.
How fast do you write?
Not very fast, relatively. So okay. So the last year in lockdown, because of, you know, furlough and things, I wrote a book in 6 months, but that's the fastest I've ever done it. Average for me is anywhere from 9 to 12 months around work, life, family, everything else. And I do about 1,000 words a day on a writing session, roughly 20 to 30 a month. That's my kind of my personal target. And that way I can get a book done in about a year or thereabouts. But I know the people that
How long are those books? Oh, sorry, because it's like 30,000 a month and it takes you 9 months.
20 to 30 a month is the target. 20 is the minimum. So the books are...
That's like 100,000 word novel.
Oh, all of mine are at least 110, 120, 130, 146 is the longest I've done.
No, I mean, sorry, more. It's more my maths. That's not, no, I mean, it's like 1 million words or something if you don't, unless you go back. Because I feel like, you know, if I write like 1,000 words a day, which I don't always do.
No, this is it.
Sometimes I write more, sometimes I write less. But when I'm in the zone, it takes me, when I wrote like a middle grade book, it took me 2 months to write.
Wow.
My adult book took me 3 months.
It's really fast.
But it's like if you actually in the zone, you kind of know what you want from your book, and you write 1,000 words a day. That's 90,000 at the end of 3 months, right? I mean, obviously it depends like how you write and how you structure and if you move things around. Because then my writing buddy took a couple of years to write a book as well. But she writes in a completely different way to me. So my brain couldn't cope with her system.
I get burnout though. If I push myself too hard, too consistently every day, I get to the point where I feel like I sit down, and even though I know where I'm going because I plan my books, there's nothing in the tank. I just sit down and I just can't. So I have to take a break and rest and come back and recharge. And so that's why it takes me, but 6 months for the last 2 books has been the average. And for me, that's very fast.
Clearly it's working for you, so.
It has so far, yeah. When you got less distractions, cats, people in the house, then
the distractions have been extensive.
The last 14 months have been challenging for lots of reasons.
Mostly because you can't get away, isn't it? It's although I mean honestly I can't complain. My kids are really good. They generally can be bribed with snacks and if all else fails. Did you write alone as well? Like, or do you usually have writing buddies?
No, I always write alone. I write with music, but never anything with lyrics. I only ever write with soundtracks to get me in the right headspace. So because if there's stuff going on and the news and whatever else, I kind of need to blot it all out so I can focus. So I put music on. It gets my head in the right space. I get into the rhythm and I just start writing. So what about you? Do you write with music or silence or?
No, I mean, I write with my friends.
Right.
So a lot. So especially over the last year or like over the pandemic, I see my writing buddy, Nadia Idol, like I see her every day. We basically Zoom call each other, and we minimize the screen and have each other hovering in the corner of the screen. And what kind of keeps you honest? Because in normal times, I would go with, I have 2 writing buddies where I live.
Mm-hmm.
And basically when I would go with one of them or both of them to a local cafe in the evening usually, and just write for an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes. But obviously when everything's closed, you have to make do. And having Zoom and having that kind of the sort of screen time with a friend is really, really helpful. So we do usually a couple sprints, as we call it. So we write just shut up and write for 25 minutes. And then we're supposed to talk for 10 minutes or something. And then we talk for an hour because it's like you really crave a chat as well.
Yeah.
And then you do the second sprint. And it's fantastic. I mean, I really recommend it because you don't interrupt each other's sort of workflow. You do the kind of sprints where you do just, there's an alarm set and you have 25 minutes to just focus and type out words, right? And also from mental health wise, it's incredible to have that, daily contact with somebody who understands what writing is, right? It's who you can discuss things with. And I mean, she's given me so many ideas because even when you discuss a problem in a plot, I'll say, okay, the aforementioned sort of volcano situation, right? And you're like, okay, I have no idea why I did this to myself, right? And then just discussing the problem and sort of talking through it, it gives you ideas. It's sort of like, as I'm describing why this problem is unsolvable, I'm getting an idea about how I could solve it, which is great. Or sometimes she will give it but have you thought about this? What happened to this other character? It's this other character is the solution to all my problems. Why did I think of it? So it's just it's marvelous, having writer buddies that you can talk through things, and it really speeds up the process because sometimes, especially during sort of pandemic time, you don't
Yeah.
fancy doing work. Like, honestly, you just want to bake brownies, eat the brownies, and go to sleep. It's not, work is not really high on your kind of priority list. But knowing that, like, okay, 3:30 I'm meeting Nadia, I'm going to be writing with Nadia. Okay, she knows I'm meeting her, I can't escape. Like, so then when I sit down, I'm really enjoying it, and it's great, and I miss it if we like miss a few days. Then I really feel like I need that time to work together. So yeah, definitely recommend it.
It's a strange compulsion, because when I'm writing, I am enjoying it, but part of my brain is always thinking, oh, you could go and do this, or you could go and do that. And you're thinking, oh, no, focus on writing. And then if I take a break and I have like a week off, by the third day, I'm like a alcoholic who hasn't had a drink for a few days. I'm like, I should go and do some writing. No, you're supposed to have a break. Okay, yeah, I'm having a break. And I start thinking about things and like, I need to work on that character. Yeah, make a note. Yeah. And just after a while, I have to start and go and do some writing again. It's like
those breaks are very valuable as well, because if you say to yourself, you know what, if you take the pressure off. So for the next 2 days, I'm not going to do any writing. But then you go on a walk or something, and then it's just occurs to you, oh, maybe I can introduce this sort of theme to it, or maybe I could like, and without the pressure, your sort of brain starts to work better, and you kind of avoid that burnout thing you mentioned. That it's not, so it feels a bit more pleasurable. But it is hard, like keeping yourself motivated at the moment where it's not, because we're not just bored, right? We're in this horrific global crisis. Every day there's something you read on the news that that will like annoy the hell out of me. And you just, so you it's this sort of toxic combination of dread and anger and frustration, because you're completely helpless. You can't do anything, and that's not very conducive to creative work. Even though creative work might be like a good cure for it, but it's hard to get motivated and because you can't go to a cafe, you can't you can't say, oh, I'll just go and write in a library, right? Or it's then having that schedule where you know each day of the week when you're going to be writing, and someone's holding you accountable. I find that very helpful.
I'm glad it's kept you motivated, having someone to write. I mean, talking to the writers at conventions, this is one of the reasons I started doing these talks, is I miss conventions so much. It's that thing of you saying, being able to talk shop. We go to the conventions, you go to the panels, and those are always great. But the best part of the panels, best part of the conventions are afterwards in the evenings. You go and stand in the bar with 20 or 30 writers, and you just talk shit. You talk shop. You talk about stuff that you know and each other's know, and you just kind of have those conversations that you can't have in front of other people. And you just talk and like, oh God, this happened to me. Oh, that happened to me. Like, oh, thank God for that. And I love those conversations. I just miss conventions.
You know
so
what?
much.
You're saying this actually makes me a little sad, because I'm missing out on it. It's my debut year, I'm like, I was so looking forward to it. So my agent John Baker, he introduced me to the Super Relaxed Fantasy Club.
Yes.
And I went once. Right, I went once in February 2020.
Right.
And the plan was I'll be going every month. That was the plan. I had the best time.
Yeah.
And I met some really fun people. I mean, I got like 3 blurbs in the end, or like 3 reviews out of that one meeting.
Brilliant.
It's so it's helpful in more ways than one, but it was just so much fun, and I felt like this is fantastic. I'll make so many friends. I'll meet so many people who are doing the thing, and it's like next month, just
lockdown,
great.
and
Great.
but they'll come back. They will come back, and they do them every year in the UK. It's really great. So EasterCon is always very good. A British Fantasy Society do a convention at least once a year. Bristol Con does a one-day thing that's really good. There are a few that in regional, regional.
I mean, you can only hope that all of it's going to come back in the form that it's
some
been.
capacity. And I mean, there's online conventions, there's one in April we're both involved with, Con, and that kind of stuff. It's all, it's good. You get some great conversations, but there's nothing beats doing it in person.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that it's interesting, some of this conventions in the US have, I can't give you an example, but I think it was some comic book conventions actually, but we were saying that like they are likely never going to go back to the format they were in pre-pandemic. And I found it really interesting because on the one hand, there's, like you said, nothing beats that sort of one-to-one contact, but having no overheads, still have, if you have like this reputation and you can make it sort of happen, but with no overheads, that's very appealing. But then again, if you can actually make people pay to access things online, because it's obviously it's a completely different proposition. If I'm going to even like, every year I really look forward to the South Bank Center Literary Festival. I try to go to at least a couple events because they just have some wonderful speakers. And but it's just, you can go to, Salman Rushdie, talk or something, and he's very entertaining and it's great fun, and then he'll sign your book, but would I pay the same amount of money to see him online when there's already like, if you don't have that kind of feeling like you're close to the person where you can ask them a couple questions, where it's like so, but that's a balance, and I wonder how some of those people are going to make it work.
Well, some of the really big conventions. So in America, like San Diego Comic-Con is the biggest one on the planet. And for years, I've never been able to go because it's too far and it's too expensive. And for years, we've kind of sat there and said, why don't they stream any of the panels and you pay like $10 or $20 and then you can watch the panels online? They said, no. And then like 2 years ago, they started doing it suddenly. So people going in person, or you could just sit at home and pay $20. I'm like, that's probably a way forward for some of these events where if you can't go because of distance, you don't like flying or the cost.
That's on top, isn't it? So it's, if you
they're making extra money for nothing for them.
Exactly.
And us sat here in the UK, be like, right, I can tune in, I can get up at 1 o'clock in the morning and sit down and watch the panel that would, that's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in America or whatever. That would be brilliant. So that kind of thing.
It's like with launches, I think, especially last year, like I think a lot of especially debut authors were just panicking about, they're like, oh my God, the launches are going to be online. It's just, how is that who's gonna turn up? It's just going to be terrible. And actually you suddenly find loads of people are turning up. I mean, it's like a joke, but it's like, an in-person kind of book launch for a debut author is like, 5 people is a crowd, right?
Yep.
But you do it on YouTube and Facebook and like 100 people show up.
Even if you got that in a bookshop, you'd be happy. You'd be over the moon if 100 people turned up. You'd be like, wow.
Well, you wouldn't have a space.
No, you wouldn't. They'd be turning them away at the door.
Unless it's like, some massive like foils and all sort of central or something. But it's so suddenly you find that there are benefits to it. And of course, you ideally you want both, don't you? Because you want that kind of experience of an in-person sort of, conversation, and just like really being in touch with people who do similar things to you, and who you can talk to, you can discuss all kinds of boring kind of technical stuff that's normal people, you talk to them and their eyes glaze over, and
basically this is why we have to go back to conventions and stand at the bar and drink and talk nonsense. This is the future.
Exactly. I talk to my friends or my husband or any family members like about like the publishing industry,
and they go, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, or like even if they truly try and they're like, okay, why does this matter?
There's so much to you. It's important, and they don't get it, and they're like they try to understand up to a point, and after a while they're like, "You're still going on about that." Oh, it's like, it's important.
Yeah, it's like now we know what actuaries feel like.